Pericles and Athens, the golden age of Greece, seen through the life of her leading statesman, A.R. Byrne. So we see nationalism and capitalism as sort of a way of summing up the philosophy of Pericles. But there's obviously more to it. Among the friends of Pericles' own age, the best-known name is that of Sophocles. They were neighbors. They were nearly the same age. Both were well-born, well-to-do, and in mind, brilliant, serious, and idealistic. Sophocles, no doubt, was more interested in poetry. Pericles in war and politics. Sophocles was religious. Pericles, a rationalist, interested in Ionian science. Sophocles was passionate and amorous. Pericles, for a Greek of his age, almost austere. But there was no division yet in Athens between men of action and aesthetics. Yeah. Civilization was still integrated. Pericles, like every intelligent man, was interested as a matter of course in the art and poetry which expressed the spirit of Athens, and Sophocles, the poet, like every good citizen, was a man of action too. Long afterwards, in the year in which he produced his Antigone, he and Pericles were generals together. The strongest influence on Pericles' intellectual development in youth is said to have been that of his music teacher, one Damon, or Damonides. Music was felt by the Greeks to be an art that every educated man should practice, and the theory of music to be a study appropriate to philosophers, one of the possible approaches to the heart of things. In the previous generation, Pythagoras, I should learn how to say Pythagoras in Greek, Pythagoras, perhaps, having discovered that only the shapes of triangles, but the notes of the lyre depended upon certain mathematical proportions, had erected on this basis a whole philosophy, an extraordinary blend of mysticism and mathematics, which deeply influenced later Greek thought. Damons was the converse development. He was not a philosopher with an interest in music, but a musician with a bent for philosophy and politics. He seems not to have belonged to the circle of the great political families, and in fact he was probably the young Pericles' most intimate contact with the world outside of the circle. Not many years older than his pupil, he remained his friend through life. He gets a bad press from the later conservative pamphleteers and gossiping historians, for it was said to have been under the influence too maybe, that Pericles, the most brilliant Athenian noble of his day, entered politics as a radical. We have seen what Herodotus, writing during the Periclean age, said about democracy, or the equal voice in politics, as a tonic to the morale of a people. Already in his youth, Pericles' democratic idealism was forming, and with it a devoted patriotism towards the city that was the bearer of this ideal, a patriotism that was something new in history. In a phrase of his old age, nothing less than passionate love towards the city of Athens. For the rest of the spirit of the age at Athens was, like Pericles himself, serious, intent, and in comparison with previous generations, austere. Even dress was being simplified, as often under a rising democracy, for the new politically important class regards the luxury of the old one with a mixture of envy and contempt. Only the older rich men now wore the long, soft Ionian tunic, hanging to the ankles, and used gold grasshopper brooches to fasten up their long hair. The new fashions, both for men and women, were simpler. For women, the Dorian, or as we say, classic peplos, whose beauty depended on its draping, not on embroidery and innumerable pleats. For men, the Dorian tunic to the knees, with the himation, a simple rectangular wooden plaid dripped over it. Both fashions were borrowed from Sparta, which, though under a military authoritarian regime, had established a rule of social equality between all full citizens. In literature, the last great masters of the aristocratic lyric poetry, Simonides and Pindar, were still active, but they had no such successors. It was Aeschylus, father of the new poetry of the theatre, whom the young Sophocles meant to emulate. But it is in art that one can see most clearly the new austerity. And we can think of the Civil Rights Act in America. 49 million people since World War II have been killed in civilian attacks on civilian, or as a result of attacks on civilian populations. Tens of millions of people have been made refugees. I mean, at any particular time now, it's so bad the past 10 years. And in this military society, your race, your religion, whatever, there's not any real official discrimination on that. There is the Patriot Act being used against smaller religious groups. There is funding, usually earmarked to groups of wealth, I guess, but that's been used to suppress people of certain, even other Christian denominations, but, you know, it's not... Essentially, there's an equality between all equal citizens. The rate at which illegal immigrants are, attacked is quite a spar on what we do inside our country. But essentially, all, in the eyes of the law and such, we have picked up the Spartan way, we could say. The most noticeable change in sculpture was the disappearance of the archaic smile, the naive, automatic party smile of past generations. In the new age, even the statuses of victorious athletes showed this new seriousness. It is one of them, a work of these very years of Pericles' adolescence, a fair-haired head found on the Acropolis, the traces of the painting of hair and eyes still undestroyed, that J.D. Beasley has hailed as the first of the long and wonderful line of 5th century boy victors, not elated in the hour of their triumph, but grave and even troubled, as if made conscious for the first time of the meaning of life. Now, if you're faking emotions, it shows, but sculptors tended not to be so good that they could show that. But an honest emotion is important. An honest expression of emotions, just fine. To say that the spirit of the time was serious and earnest is not, of course, to say that it was melancholy. All indications are that it was a happy, because a confident age, in an age which every normal Athenian, landed nobleman or bourgeois, democrat, craftsman, poet, or farmer, had a clear idea of what he wanted to do and high hopes of doing it. Again, it's something that in the pursuit of happiness, you can't change anybody's pursuit of happiness, but a society where people can have hopes. The artist, in addition to abolishing the archaic smile, we're working towards a truer, less conventional portrayal of the human form and a world towards greater realism. Beasley says, again, of a typical athlete statue of the new school, the weight is no longer equally distributed between the two legs, but rests principally on one, here, and the left. The left hip is consequently higher than the right. The shoulders are uneven, the spine curves, the axis of the whole body is thrown out, and the head turns to one side instead of looking straight in front of it. Now, given that most of the women are obese in America, and most of the men aren't in that good of shape either, you know, what is our art? Is our art representing this? No, we're spray painting women to mark. Well, I guess they canceled that show, didn't they? Oh, perhaps they'll have it at a different day or time or something. Epstein's dead, so. But spray people painted up to look like they're adolescents. Even people in their 40s, thicker and thicker makeup, and even hiding some prosthetic in there so they can do a movie or at least be buried, right? One would like to know if some of the old gentlemen with gold grasshoppers in their hair did not sometimes describe the new sculptures in very much these terms and comment disgusting. Politically, as often after war, it was a time of reaction. The Council of Areopagus, like the Roman Senate in the war with Hannibal, having distinguished itself in a crisis, showed every sign of trying to perpetuate its political leadership, composed as it is still, was chiefly of men elected before 489 BCE to the highest offices of state. It concentrated in its ranks the best political experience of Athens, and it had ancient traditional, though not statutory, powers through which it could, if united, almost control the working of the Constitution, especially that of arranging as an offender against law or public decency anyone whose conduct the Areopagites disapproved. The conservative majority of Areopagites at this time were united. Their leaders, to whom Themistocles had played cuckoo in the nest in the years between the wars, adopted his big navy policy but drew together against him personally. Themistocles found himself in opposition and losing ground. Jealousy against him probably played a large part. He is believed to enrich himself enormously during his political career, and his reported sayings breathe a complacency that was tactless, even if justified. One of his acts, which did him no good in the long run, was to dedicate a temple to Artemis, the best in council, and memory of his own achievements. Another, at the least interesting, was at 476 to pay for the production at the spring dramatic festival of a tragedy, at this time a kind of oratorio, not on one of the usual traditional mythological themes, but on the Battle of Salamis. The poet was a veteran, one Phrynikos, I don't know, 18 years before, at the time of Themistocles' archonship. He had produced a similar historical piece called The Fall of Miletus, representing the ruin of Ionia in such heart-rending terms as the Athenians, with a bad conscience about their withdrawal of support, find the poet probably on the pretext of impiety, mixing the religious and the mundane. No such bitterness marred the present occasion. Phrynikos won the prize for tragedy, and lyrics from the play were still popular 50 years later. It was too late to save Themistocles, but among those who applauded most warmly, the Phoenician women, the chorus represented wives of the defeated sailors, were Asculas, a slightly younger veteran, and the young Pericles. One wonders whether relations were strained between old Xanthippus and his intellectual, radical son, for Pericles made no secret of the fact that he admired Themistocles, but probably before 473 BCE, too soon to see the exile of his own enemy Xanthippus died. I'm reminded of a word from a show that was on Fox not I think it had like one season or something, like Sports Bar or something. They're at some guy's funeral. He was a horrible monster, and we pray for his death. He was that's his funeral pot. Everybody, that was just part of their speech. It was, well, something about it was better than what I can remember. Pericles found himself a fairly rich man, and he at once proclaimed his political sympathies by probably volunteering to pay, out of turn, for the plays entered by Ascylus at the festival of 472. Among the 4 plays which made up a poet's regular entry, one still survives, The Persians, a play in which Ascylus rehandled to his own satisfaction the subject of the Phoenician women, and the only surviving example of those early Athenian experiments in dramatizing the history of their own times. It was one of Ascylus's great successes, and thus appropriately the name of Pericles made its first appearance in Athenian history. But in spite of all efforts, Themistocles lost his battle with the Areopagus. Probably in 472, he himself was ostracized. He lived for some years at Argos, during which period the democracy on Cleisthenic model made rapid strides there and elsewhere in the Peloponnese, to Sparta's alarm. Then Sparta claimed to have evidence that he was in communication with Persia. He was impeached at Athens in absence by one Leobates, the son of Alcmaeon, significant name, and found guilty. Argos could no longer shelter him, and after an adventurous escape up the west coast of Greece, across the wild Pindos mountains, across the Aegean, passing through an Athenian fleet under an assumed name, Themistocles lived out his remaining years as a pensioner of the Persian king. Now, politics for itself, an adversarial sort of politics, is going to be adversarial against you at some point. Maybe you can stay ahead of the game. Fake news. People believe people who aren't witnesses are going to act like they're witnesses, and I guess that is what you could say is going to eventually bring an end to the country that I'm in one way or another. So recognize that famous sculpture with his name, Make Athens Great Again.